Welcome to the Valley of Death, as I'm sure this place will be nicknamed in just a couple of hours. This scenario takes place in the alternate timeline of the combat mission Black Sea backstory, in which Russia invades Ukraine in 2017 and the United States intervenes directly. Today I'm in command of a U.S. Army Tank and Mechanized Infantry Company team of the 1st Cavalry Division's 1st Brigade Combat Team. A Russian spearhead is broken through at Dnipro, and our force has been sent to intercept it. A quick side note, while looking up how to pronounce Dnipropetrovsk, I learned that the city had been renamed to Dnipro in 2016. Combat Mission Black Sea was released in 2014, before the name change, which is why it's written as Dnipropetrovsk in the briefing, but since the game is set in 2017, after the name change, I think it makes sense for me to use the current name. On map, I currently have a small recon section consisting of one M3 Bradley, that's the cavalry variant with more ammunition and less room for passengers, 2 Humvees equipped with the long-range Advanced Scout Surveillance System, that's the big box with all of the sights that you can see mounted to the right of the 50 caliber machine gun, and a sniper team riding in the back of the far more bog-standard Humvee. Following 15 minutes behind is 1st Platoon, a mechanized infantry platoon mounted in M2 Bradleys. 2nd Platoon, also a mech infantry platoon mounted in Bradleys, is following another 10 minutes behind them. And 3rd Platoon, our Abrams tank platoon, is following another 10 minutes behind them. So it won't be until I'm 35 minutes into the battle that I finally get some tanks. It's this mixing of tanks and infantry that makes this a company team, rather than just a company. The U.S. Army creates combined arms formations by having 2 units exchange subunits. For example, you would create combined arms battalion task forces by having a mechanized infantry battalion and a tank battalion exchange companies, and you would create combined arms company teams by having a mech infantry company and a tank company exchange platoons. In my case, one of the 3 mechanized infantry platoons of my original company would have been traded for a platoon from a tank company, creating 2 company teams. 1 mech-heavy company team of 2 mechanized infantry platoons and 1 tank platoon, and 1 tank-heavy company team of 2 tank platoons and 1 mechanized infantry platoon. Alternatively, if my company headquarters is from a tank company, I may have traded 2 of my tank platoons to 2 different infantry companies for 2 infantry platoons from 2 different infantry companies, forming 3 mech-heavy company teams, 2 led by mechanized infantry headquarters, and 1 led by a tank headquarters. Of course, every army recognizes that tanks and infantry are stronger together than apart, so every army around the world has some method for bringing them together into combined arms formations. The Russian spearhead that I'm racing to stop is expected to consist of a tank battalion, but I won't be facing just tanks, because the Russians also organize their tanks and infantry into combined arms formations when they go into combat. But the Russian army, just like the Soviet army before them, uses a different method. Instead of having units of different types trade subunits, a unit is reinforced with a subunit of a different type. For example, I expect the tank battalion I'm facing to have been reinforced with an infantry company. The infantry battalion that the company came from will have been completely broken up in order to provide a reinforcing company to 3 different tank battalions. The leading Russian element appears to be a reconnaissance company mounted in Tiger infantry mobility vehicles. The Tiger is basically the Russian Humvee, an armored truck with some room in the back for passengers and a pintle mount for a weapon up top. If you believe that reconnaissance is just about sneaking forward, spotting the enemy, and radioing back what you found, then a simple light vehicle like this is all you need. But if, like the US Army, you believe that it may sometimes be necessary to fight for information, then it might occur to you that it might be nice to bring something a bit heavier along, which is why the US Army habitually has heavier vehicles, such as Bradleys and Abrams, participate in reconnaissance. While my Bradley's busy shredding the Russian reconnaissance force, I'm having what infantry I have dismount to take up positions to observe the valley from the tree line. This two-man scout team was mounted in a Humvee that I decided to leave sitting a bit further back, meaning they have a bit longer to run to get to the tree line. But, having met the leading Russian element and feeling like I've defeated it, I think I have an opportunity to race in and secure some ground objectives I have in the valley. My thinking is that it will be easier to race in and take them now with no opposition and defend them against Russian attack than it will be to let the Russians take them and have to seize them from the Russians later. Which is why I'm now racing the Humvee, the same one that the two-man scout team dismounted from, forward. Sorry guys for having you run so far for no reason.
Contact. Enemy vehicle. We got him. He's hit.
It's not just the two-man scout team that I'm having mount back up into their vehicle for the push forward. I'm bringing everyone along for this. This is a decision that I'm going to regret. I'm high on my easy victory against the very light Russian recon force. I know that my own recon force is also pretty light compared to the heavier units that will be joining the battle later, but I'm thinking that I only need them to hold my objectives in the valley for a few more minutes before my first reinforcements start entering the battle.
Sarge, he spotted enemy vehicle. Enemy vehicle sighted. Watch out. Not good now.
These woods on my side of the valley seem like the best position from which to try to defend it, and I decide to place my Bradley and most of my infantry here. The one exception is my Humvee with the two-man scout team. They pushed a bit further forward to the houses on the other side of the valley. One of the disadvantages of being in the valley, as opposed to overlooking it, is the short sight lines. This allows a Russian Tiger to seemingly come out of nowhere and dash right by my Humvee
Enemy
before it can
vehicle
react.
Sarge, we spotted enemy vehicles.
Fortunately, for me, unfortunately for the poor crew of that Tiger, my Bradley is quick on the draw. We lose the spot as the line of sight between it and the Bradley is broken by some trees, but a rising smoke column a few seconds later confirms the outcome of the engagement. We spot a lone Russian soldier. My guess is that he's a sole survivor from one of the Tigers we destroyed further back. We've entered a bit of a lull. I'm feeling pretty good about how the battle is going so far. I've pretty much completely destroyed the leading Russian recon element by this point. I've captured my ground objectives in the valley without suffering any losses, and my first wave of reinforcements should be arriving in less than a minute to help me hold the ground I've taken. The magnitude of the mistake I've made has not yet become apparent to me. I've assigned a relatively weak recon element the task of actually holding ground. Worse, I've put them in a win-or-die position. The hill behind the tree line where I've put the bulk of my troops is entirely devoid of cover, and the trees are not tall enough to conceal the top of the hill from Russian forces on the other side of the valley, meaning that any attempt at retreat will inevitably result in my men being exposed on the crest of the hill. Easy targets. The Russian reinforcements arrive first. For a few seconds, it looks like I must have missed pieces of their leading recon force, but it soon becomes apparent that these guys are from a fresh wave of reinforcements.
Contact enemy vehicle.
and this time they've brought something a bit heavier than Tigers. I catch brief glimpses of BMP-3s emerging from some of the trees on the right. Each one of these is a much closer match for my Bradley. My own first platoon of reinforcements has arrived on the map, but still has a long distance to travel before they reach the forward edge of the battle. Until they do, my lone M3 Bradley is outnumbered by a factor of 4 to 1 by vehicles that are each roughly equivalent to it in combat power. I do have some other assets that may help me to even the odds.
Watch out, enemy
My
vehicle.
scout section headquarters has a javelin that they've acquired from the back of the Bradley, but this takes time to lock onto a target, and the gunner loses the spot behind some trees. The first AT-4 is intercepted by the BMP's Arena Active Protection System. It takes time for the APS to reset after intercepting a projectile, so if the second soldier had managed to fire his AT-4, it probably would have gotten through, but he loses the spot before he can fire.
Contact, enemy vehicle.
My bad luck continues. My Bradley manages to fire a TOW at one of the BMPs, but the TOW-2B's top attack profile in this instance is just off-center enough that the BMP manages to survive. Things finally go my way when two of my men salvo their AT-4s one right after the other at an oncoming BMP-3. The first triggers the BMP's APS, while the second destroys the BMP. Salvoing 2 or more anti-tank weapons like this is a likely tactic for armies to develop for dealing with active protection systems. My Bradley is also protected by an APS, which saves it from a gun-launched ATGM fired by one of the BMPs. But they soon tear it to pieces with cannon fire. That was my first significant loss of the battle. I wish I could say that it would be my last. One of 1st Platoon's Bradleys is finally in position to start engaging the enemy and fires TOWs at an oncoming Russian tank.
Enemy tank sighted.
The first missile fails to destroy its target, and the second one malfunctions. We'll have more opportunities to fire, but it's too late to save my doomed scout section. I turn my attention toward trying to destroy any further Russian vehicles that try to rush into the valley, to which end I want to get as many long-range anti-tank weapons into good firing positions as possible. At this point in the battle, weapons I have available for this purpose are the TOW missiles mounted on my Bradleys, and javelins, of which I've issued one each to each of my infantry squads. I start splitting off 2-man javelin teams from my infantry squads and moving my Bradleys into firing positions. Unfortunately, a Russian tank spots this Bradley almost as soon as it gets back into position. The tank's laser rangefinder sets off the Bradley's laser warning receiver, and it starts retreating, but not fast enough. This is near pure warfare. The Russian tanks I'm facing in this scenario are T-90Ms. The T-90M is the best tank that the Russians have. And no, the T-14 Armata does not count until they can produce it in more than just prototype numbers. On the one hand, it's true that the T-90 is basically just a T-72 by another name, but you can think of the T-90 series as the lineage of T-72s that get the premium upgrades, and those upgrades make a big difference. The T-90M has good thermal sights, a good fire control system, relic explosive reactive armor that is capable of presenting a greater challenge to the armor-piercing ammunition fired by my Abrams in Combat Mission Black Sea, and is firing newer ammunition that has a better chance of penetrating the frontal armor of my Abrams. Basically, I'm facing an adversary that is as heavily armed as I am, can spot and engage targets as quickly as I can, as accurately as I can, and which is fully capable of inflicting significant casualties against even my best equipped formations. Something over to the left trips this Bradley's laser warning receiver. I can't be sure what it is, and I don't see anything over there, but I've already lost 2 Bradleys in just the last few minutes, so I'm hardly in any mood to argue with the laser warning right now. Back down in the valley, the Russians mop up the last of my recon section. The 2-man scout section is keeping themselves relatively well hidden in a house, where they will wait out the rest of the battle, but there's nothing I can do for the rest of my recon section. The last surviving member of the sniper team harasses a BMP-3 with his grenade launcher, but there's a small difference in firepower between an underbarrel grenade launcher and an autocannon. Once again, my Bradley gets a laser warning from something over to the left. Once again, it manages to reverse out of danger without blowing up. But, once again, I still don't see any sign of the culprit.
Sarge, we spotted enemy vehicles.
My infantry spots some more BMPs coming in along the right side of the map. It's finally time for my javelins to shine.
Watch out, enemy vehicle.
We get 1 missile away and score 1 more BMP destroyed.
Good shot.
Enemy vehicle.
Second platoon has arrived on the map, along with my infantry company headquarters, giving me 7 additional Bradleys, bringing me up to a total of 10 Bradleys on the map. That would be 12 if I hadn't already lost 2. Meanwhile, my infantry managed to throw another javelin, putting me ahead of the Russians in IFE kills. I've had 1st Platoon's forward observer call in a drone, giving me an overhead view of the Russian forces in the valley. They're concentrating on the reverse slope, just behind the tree line that is intended to defend the valley from. I'd put 1st Platoon in a clump of trees on the right side of the map. I'm having 2nd Platoon race up the left side of the map in order to take up positions along the tree line on the left. The Russians look poised to attack. They're massing behind the last covered terrain feature before my positions further up the hill. But, as long as they stay put for just a few minutes, they're making a pretty good target for a linear artillery barrage.
Roger. Fire mission request. Out. Shot. Over.
2nd Platoon reaches the tree line on the left, and I order the Bradleys to stop just short of a gentle rise just behind the tree line to have the infantry dismount. I'll move the infantry forward into the trees, and will have the Bradleys take up positions that are hull down to a point roughly halfway down the slope of the far hill, making up the other side of the valley.
Flash. Over.
The first spotting round for my artillery barrage arrives.
Flash out.
It's a bit wide of the mark, but the impact is visible to my forward observer through the drone footage, so he should be able to walk it onto target before the battery fires for effect.
Follow me, man.
Shot. Over. Shot. Out.
Follow me. Advance.
Advance.
My javelins on the right continue to rake in more BMP kills.
Flash. Over. Flash. Shot. Over. Shot. Out.
Quiet down. Let's get some noise this one here.
A single artillery shell hits the trees above 1st Platoon's forward observer team. This has to be a spotting round for a Russian artillery barrage. This doesn't prevent 1st Platoon's forward observer from continuing to walk the spotting rounds for our own artillery barrage onto target, though this last round doesn't look like it actually got much closer.
Get on board.
I start rushing my infantry back into their Bradleys in order to pull them out from under where I expect the Russian artillery barrage to land. Even if they don't pull out before the barrage starts hitting, they'll have a much better chance of surviving from inside the armored hulls of their Bradleys.
Flash. Over.
That round looks a lot closer. It looks like the Russians are walking their spotting rounds to the left, so I order one of my infantry squads that's a bit further to the right to just run even further right, rather than try to find a Bradley for them to climb into. First platoon is already down to Bradley, so there aren't enough to go around anymore.
Flash, over. Fire for effect, over. Fire for effect, out.
Just as my artillery barrage starts firing for effect, 2nd Platoon's Bradleys spot some Russian reinforcements coming in. I can see the Russian artillery barrage firing for effect right where one of my Javelin teams used to be a minute earlier, while 2nd Platoon starts raking in T-90 kills. With both the tow missiles fired by my Bradleys
Enemy tank spotted.
and the Javelins fired by my infantry. My artillery barrage is right on target, but since I'm targeting tanks, I need to hope for direct hits on the tops of the tanks in order to get any kills. It's worth noting that if I was facing a human opponent rather than the AI, they would probably have moved their tanks out from under the barrage by now. One of 2nd Platoon's Javelin teams gets off another missile, but the Russian tanks spot the team's thermal signature in the trees and start hitting them back with precision shell fire.
Get up.
But 2nd Platoon still has 2 other Javelin teams, which gets some revenge for their fallen comrades.
Target hit. On fire.
My artillery barrage does in fact manage to score some direct hits. A rising smoke column confirms that these have managed to destroy at least one tank. And my own tanks have now arrived on the battlefield and are racing forward as fast as possible to get stuck into the fighting. Despite my efforts to nudge 1st Platoon's Bradleys into hull-down positions to contribute their toes to the fight, something over on the left just keeps spooking their laser warning receivers. But this time I'm able to figure out what it is. There's an AT-14 Kornet missile team in the tree line on the Russian side of the valley. My artillery barrage manages to get another direct hit on a Russian tank. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like this one managed to knock it out. Now that I know there's an AT-14 team in the far tree line, I'm moving a few of my Bradleys back into safer positions. It looks like an artillery shell only just misses this one. The Russians must be calling in another barrage. It's actually been a few years since I've last played with the M1 Abrams, and I can't help but be impressed by its mobility. It's shockingly nimble for such a heavy vehicle. It moves fast, accelerates fast, and can turn on a dime. A reminder that modern tanks don't actually need to compromise all that much between armor, firepower, and tactical mobility. There are still design compromises that need to be made, but which factors you need to compromise between when designing a weapon system can change over time. Actually, the trinity of armor, firepower, and mobility really isn't the best framework for thinking about tanks in the first place. Maybe I'll tackle that in more depth someday, but I think a better framework is survivability, lethality, mobility, and context. Armor is one component of survivability, but not the only one. Firepower is one component of lethality, but not the only one. Mobility can be subdivided into tactical mobility, the ability to move around a battlefield, operational mobility, the ability to move around a theater of operations, and strategic mobility, the ability to move to a theater of operations from the home front or from one theater of operations to another. And context is a reminder to think about things like the intended role of that particular tank. Is it a general purpose tank or something more specialized like an airborne light tank? And the particular challenges and capabilities of the particular army that is using that tank. Now that I have my tanks up, I order them to fire a few rounds into the location of the AT-14 Kornet team that I spotted in the far tree line earlier. They fire several programmable high-explosive rounds that airburst directly over the last known location of the Kornet team. I don't currently have a firm spot on the team, so I can't observe the effects of the fire, but I fire enough rounds to be reasonably confident that it's out of action. The target is more than 2.5 kilometers away, but my tanks hit the intended spot with pinpoint precision. The Russians bring in another artillery barrage right where one of my Javelin teams used to be. That would be the one that they already eliminated with their own precision tank fire. It still manages to lightly wound some of the other members of the squad that the Javelin team came from, which I've moved a bit further back to a position I hoped would be out of danger. I get one final batch of reinforcements, consisting of a pair of mortar carriers, a Humvee carrying the mortar platoon leader, a Humvee carrying the headquarters company commander, I assume that would be the headquarters company of the battalion task force that my company team is organized under, and a single Abrams, which is confusingly named 1BCT First Team HQ. The HQ for my company team is already on the map, so I'm guessing this must be the battalion task force commander. The Russian tanks start to move up beyond the trees. It turns out they aren't making a push on my positions just yet, but they nevertheless spooked me into withdrawing some of my javelin teams back to cover.
Shot, over. Shot, out. Fire for effect, over.
On the bright side, this Bradley manages to spot and destroy 2 BMP-3s as it moves forward to pick up one of my javelin teams.
Shot, out.
Enemy vehicles ahead.
Meanwhile, my battalion commander's tank spots and hits a Russian tank at a range of 3,590 meters, while one of my other tanks spots and destroys a Russian artillery observation vehicle at a range of only 2,500 meters.
You got him. Shit. Target on fire.
I called in precision artillery on one of the tanks that was immobilized by my earlier barrage. Unfortunately, none of the rounds scored a direct hit. Since I'm using a drone to spot the targets for my artillery, my forward observer can't point his laser designator at these tanks, meaning that the precision rounds are relying on GPS guidance, which is less accurate than laser guidance.
Fire for effect, out.
While I'm reasonably sure I destroyed the Russian AT-14 Kornet, I figure it can't hurt to lob a few 120mm mortars in their direction, just to be on the safe side.
Quiet down. Let's get some noise discipline here.
I see a spotting round for a renewed Russian artillery barrage hit in the field behind my tree line, which prompts me to pull all of my infantry that aren't currently operating javelins a bit further back. One of my tanks has spotted some dismounted Russian tank crewmen. And my battalion CEO fires another round at the T-90 that's nearly 3,600 meters away. This shot misses, so the Abrams can miss after all. I call in 3 more precision artillery rounds on a Russian tank. They land very close to the target, but we're still not getting the direct hits we need in order to actually destroy any of these tanks. I've caught on to the fact that the Russian tanks don't seem to have committed to attacking just yet, so I'm pushing my Javelin teams back out again, since I'm still expecting more Russian reinforcements to try to push down into the valley.
West fire mission out.
Watch out! Enemy tank!
My battalion CO tank fires a few more rounds at the distant T-90, which fortunately seems to be immobilized. 2 of the rounds hit and 1 misses. My Abrams seems to have about a 50-50 chance of hitting a stationary tank that's 3,600 meters away. To put this into some context, I've seen several Cold War-era training films that were practically bragging about the fact that the M60 tank had a 50-50 chance of hitting at 1,500 meters. The distance at which a tank will have a 50-50 chance of hitting its target is one way to express its accuracy. After several attempts, my precision artillery finally manages to destroy one of the Russian tanks. And my battalion CO tank finally lands a killing hit on the distant T-90. The placement of some of these Russian spotting rounds has me concerned that I may not have moved these infantry squads back far enough. I also decide to move my headquarters company command team forward. There are 3 people in this Humvee, carrying 3 more M4s and 3 more AT4s, which I might want to have forward. Plus I can have them act as medics for the Javelin team that got destroyed earlier. Both of those guys are still alive, just critically wounded and out of the fight. The next few Russian artillery rounds land on empty field. Moving my infantry around every time I see spotting rounds incoming seems to be paying off. Things have been going relatively slowly up to this point, but that changes all at once when my drone sees the Russian tanks start to make their big push forward, leading to some of the most heart-pounding few minutes that I've ever experienced in a combat mission game. Several of my vehicles start getting laser warnings from a fresh wave of Russian reinforcements arriving on the far side of the map. Most are able to withdraw to safety, but not all of them. The Russian tanks begin cresting over the slope, leading to an intense close-range knife fight. And, just as quickly as it all went to hell, suddenly the situation seems to be back under control. My Abrams were the heroes of the hour, proving themselves as adept at close-quarters knife fighting as they are at long-range sniping. There are still several Russian tanks incoming, but I feel like I'm back in control of the fight and no longer in imminent danger of being overrun. I resume trying to pick off T-90s at long range as they attempt to cross the valley. This mostly goes my way, though I do lose another Bradley. Remarkably, one of my Javelin operators that I pushed far out into the field in front of the tree line to try to get a better line of fire survived the Russian tank charge despite 2 high explosive rounds airbursting near his position.
Enemy tank ahead.
Roger. Fire mission request. Out. Good job.
Despite taking losses, some of the Russian tanks from their next wave did manage to make it across the valley. I decide that I'd rather not repeat the experience of the last knife fight, and I'll be in a better position to receive their attack if I pull back to the next field.
Quiet. Over. Flash out. Fire for effect. Over. Roger. Fire for effect.
I'm out of precision artillery, but even my non-precision artillery is accurate enough to have a good chance of landing direct hits on those immobilized tanks being watched by my drone, if I fire a few more rounds. So I call in a short artillery barrage on one of the remaining tanks. This time, I get a direct hit with the second round, destroying one more T-90M. Second Platoon's vehicles have not yet finished pulling back to the next tree line when the first tanks from the next wave arrive, though my Abrams are able to react quickly enough to prevent the Russians from capitalizing.
Out. Enemy armor.
It looks like they're trying to push up the main road in the center of the map, perhaps on the assumption that they only needed to exploit the success of the previous wave of Russian tanks. We quickly disabuse them of that notion. Now that is what I'd call a close encounter. Sorry, just rewatched Independence Day.
Shot, over. Shot, out.
With the immediate threat destroyed, I continue pulling everyone back to the next tree line.
Flank. Shot, over. Shot, out. Flash, over. Flash, out. Fire for effect, over. Roger, fire for effect.
I try to bring in a bit more artillery on the remaining immobilized tank, though this time the rounds land very wide of the mark. One more Russian tank appears on the left side of our old tree line. With it destroyed, I think that might actually be the end of the Russian attack. It's probably about time that I start thinking about counterattacking. My infantry find themselves dodging Russian spotting rounds on their way to the rear. This is way too far back for a Russian forward observer to be drawing a direct line of sight from their side of the valley. The Russians must have a drone of their own up overlooking my positions. Unfortunately, there is no way to spot enemy drones in the commercial version of the CM2 game engine. I don't really want to commit to a counterattack until my artillery destroys that last immobilized Russian tank in the valley. But, in anticipation of that, I start moving some of 1st Platoon's infantry forward to a start line that is just about hidden from Russian forces in the valley.
Follow me. Advance.
Follow me, man!
Flash. Flash out.
So far, my infantry had been fairly successful in dodging the sporadic Russian artillery fire, but my luck finally runs out, and one of my men is critically wounded by shell fragments.
Shot. Over. Shot. Out. Flash. Over.
Advance.
Flash. Out.
Move out, man. Let's go.
Cover me.
Shot. Over. Shot. Out.
And just a little while later, another man is killed by shell fragments. I decide to start moving my tanks forward into a start line for the counterattack. I'm almost ready to launch the counterattack at this point, just waiting on the artillery.
Shot. Over.
In the process of pushing forward, we encounter a lone Russian tank that had retreated from the earlier fighting. Luckily, we're quicker on the draw. Some surviving crewmen from my knocked out Bradleys also find themselves dodging Russian artillery as they move back to the rear. My artillery seems to be having trouble getting onto target this time. I cancel the barrage and instead decide to kill one of my Abrams to the far right, where it will have a better chance of flanking that last immobilized T-90M. I'm pretty sure that my Abrams would be favored to win a frontal engagement, but I always want to stack the odds as heavily in my favor as possible. One of my remaining Abrams spots a BMP-3 back at the far tree line on the Russian side of the valley. I can only assume someone important was riding in it if it stayed so far back. With the last T-90M destroyed, there's nothing left in those trees that can pose a significant threat to my Abrams. I know because I've been watching that area with a drone this whole time. Nothing can stop the impending massacre.
Shot, over. Shot, out. Shot, out. Shot, over. Out. Shot, out. Shot, out. Over. Shot, out. Fire for effect. Fire for effect. Over. Shot, over. Shot, out.
With that, the Russians surrender. I've achieved a minor victory. The loss of my recon section lost me the points for keeping my casualties down, and gave the Russians some points for inflicting heavy casualties on me. Overall, I suffered 36 casualties, and the Russians suffered 204 casualties. That's a 5.67 to 1 loss ratio in my favor. I lost 0 tanks, 7 Bradleys, and 4 Humvees. The Russians lost 30 T-90Ms, 10 armored vehicles, of which 9 were BMP-3s and 1 was an MTLB artillery observation vehicle, and 10 Tiger infantry mobility vehicles. My Abrams were the stars of the show, accounting for 66 Russian casualties, 15 tanks, and 4 armored vehicles, as well as 1 Tiger between them. My Bradleys accounted for 77 Russian casualties, 7 tanks, 2 armored vehicles, and 8 Tigers. My infantry accounted for 45 Russian casualties, 5 tanks, and 4 BMPs. My artillery accounted for 11 casualties, which frustratingly does not add up to 204, so I'm not sure what inflicted the remaining 5 Russian casualties, and 3 tanks. I think it's fair to say that we've stopped the Russian spearhead and contributed to containing their breakthrough from Dnipro. Although I didn't lose any Abrams, one should not come away thinking that they are invincible. They took several hits, mostly during the 3-minute knife fight. Though none of the hits inflicted any crew casualties, some of them did achieve partial penetration of the armor, and one of them disabled the main gun, coax, and weapons controls of one of my tanks. So they would not have withstood endless punishment if I had senselessly let them sit and absorb hits. As always, you should try to avoid taking hits in the first place, rather than relying on your armor. Still, the enemy gets a vote too, and sooner or later they will manage to score hits despite your best efforts to avoid it. So while you should never rely on your armor does matter, and I was impressed with the Abrams' ability to withstand punishment from even very modern armor-piercing ammunition. As always, if you enjoyed the video, liking and commenting will encourage the YouTube algorithm to share it with more people, and I'll be grateful if you'll help my channel grow by subscribing.